Okay, so this is What Are We Doing to White People by Charlie Cheon. This video blew up just from a couple of weeks or so. Now it's at 1.4 views. So let's see what this fellow Asian brother is talking about white people.
Let's talk about what we're doing to white people. There's been something going on for a while now that we're being told not to notice. More to the point, that we're asking white people not only to ignore, but to accept. The rising tide of racial hatred against white people. Back when I was a kid, in the early 2000s, the mainstream American culture preached about respecting each other's differences and not seeing color. Nowadays, we say that not seeing color is racism, that you must see color.
So this is interesting because that's actually so true. So I'm Japanese American, so I've always kind of grown up with dual, I guess, cultures and whatever. And I've traveled a decent amount. But actually, one thing that I heard recently is, throughout my travels, is that white people are really obsessed with race. And someone said that to me a month ago, and I've been thinking about that, and I think that's so true. I think, everything from the racial quotas that we have through school, jobs, as well as everything on the news, whenever there's some sort of incident, it's always about race, right? And it's interesting too, because I was recently in Brazil, which is one of the most racially mixed countries in the world. And what I've noticed there is that they don't really talk about race like we do. They have more kind of a cultural identity where they view it as maybe differences in income or differences in region. So a lot of the differences that we talk about, though, I feel are always pitted against some sort of racial bias, right? Oh, that's what Latino people do, or oh, that's a very Asian thing. I've noticed that that's a very common thing throughout America, and we see it through our entertainment and in all these different industries where we're always kind of obsessing about race.
The more I see how things are unfolding, the more I'm convinced that this is wrong. Back then, saying something offhanded about white people were seen as not appropriate, just as it would be to say something offhanded about people of any other race. But that soon gave way to our current times, in which there exists virtually no limit to what racial minorities can and do say about white people. I believe this is the natural outgrowth of a perverse ideology that teaches us that every societal ill is the fault of white people.
That is true. We do have, as an Asian person or a minority in America, we do have a minority privilege in that sense, where I feel for me, the topics that I cover, such as social and controversial issues, I'm able to do that. Whereas let's say a white dude did the same thing and asked people in the streets, they would definitely get so much more backlash. But the fact that one, there's I guess not many Asian social commenters and doing people doing interviews on such questions like this, I feel I get more leeway because I'm not a white dude. That definitely is a minority privilege that we have nowadays.
I want you to take a look at the things that are being said about white people, especially by the younger generation, the kind of statements people wouldn't dare say about people of any other race. Take a look at what is stunningly in vogue in today's society and ask yourselves, where does this lead to years down the line?
You have a token white and you're hanging out with your friend group of color. You need to ask permission from everybody in the group to bring your white friend.
I think as we watch this, let's try and substitute when they say white people with any other race, like Latino people or Asian people or black. Yeah, and look, I'm no saint, right? I make these jokes still to this day, right? Especially food, unseasoned food, that's some white people shit. School shooters, I think that's a pretty white thing. So look, I'm no saint, right? I make these jokes too.
Opposites ask, how can they support Black and Indigenous people of color? Here's one easy way. Just don't have babies.
These are some things I noticed about white American culture. Being grounded is a punishment to them. That's what they call punishment.
Okay, that's facts though. Look, I've had instances where I'm hanging out with my Korean friend. We're playing video games, Mario Kart or something. And I think my friend's little brother forgot to take out the trash or something. Mind you not, his fucking Korean mom came in with a solid wooden plank and just, without me caring that I'm there and watching all this as a guest, started just fucking beating my friend's little brother in the head. And I'm just watching there playing my video game yo, what the hell is happening? So that is true. I'd say definitely ethnic minorities, we definitely have way worse punishments compared to white people. Getting grounded, shit, I've been slapped before in the face. And white Americans definitely do get away with some easy punishments. Getting grounded, come on.
Some people look at that and chalk it up to the grumblings of the powerless. That's the idea that when you have a power disparity, the less powerful sort of has this general society given leeway to complain about the more powerful. The villagers complaining about their king doesn't have the same ring as the king making snide and crude comments about the villagers. But that's not what's going on here. Because although certain segments of our society refuse to believe this, even as evidence mount before our very eyes, in one side of the political aisle, people of color actually have greater power than white people.
Ooh. Yeah, I think in certain aspects, for sure. I think being able to voice your opinion, you can't do that as a white dude now. I think white women can, but yeah, having an opinion is not a privilege for white people anymore.
These are the same people who are making tenuous arguments that some of our race-neutral laws discriminate against people of color. And this is certainly evidence that in one side of the political aisle, people of color have more power than white people. Because if we didn't have the power, we wouldn't be able to put into place practices and policies that does this. That's what power is. Things like Minneapolis local government agreeing to a contract with the teachers union that says white teachers must be fired first.
I feel like this is like a perfect instance of how woke and racist people are kind of the same thing. There's actually been a funny sketch that this YouTuber named Ryan Long did, but it's essentially like woke and racist people are saying the same things because they're essentially making what they believe to be a woke law where they're trying to protect people of color, but outright discriminating based on race, right? Like, for example, giving race-based preferential COVID treatments or, firing white teachers first. That's literally what a racist person would do in the past to, people of color. So essentially what it's happening is that it's kind of gone full circle where now woke people, which they think they're doing good, is literally implementing racist policies. I think there's a lot of double standards when it comes to this, and I think this video is absolutely illuminating that. Yeah, let's move on.
To the white people who are watching, I just want to say, you are not an oppressor for refusing to accept an ideology that teaches people to hate you, that teaches you that you are inherently bad.
Yeah, and what's cringy too is like seeing a lot of those white, like white people with just so much white guilt, right? I think every minority's probably experienced like some white people like that. Just so cringy, man. They're like, oh, I'm like so sorry for what I did, like what my ancestors did. Like, stop, like, look at yourself.
You did not choose to be born white, just like any of us did not choose to be born in our race. And to ask of you, at the individual level, for example, to give your life in service of people of color, to be used as physical barriers at protests, to give away your house to black people instead of your children, all actual things that have been publicly demanded of white people, to ask this of you is morally reprehensible collective punishment. You are not under any obligation to carry yourself in any sort of way that others demand of you just because of the color of your skin.
Yeah, I bet you if I scroll down in the comments, people are gonna be saying like, oh, like, you're only having this opinion because you're so oppressed, or even myself for having this commentary defending white people, is that gonna make me a white apologist?
If you're of a liberal bent, but there's a small corner in your brain telling you as you're watching this video that perhaps some of this is wrong, listen to your intuition. Maybe you think, oh, I agree with most of what the progressive left teaches about racial justice, but just not with some of this disagreeable stuff, only at the extremes. I'm here to tell you that the rot starts at the core. This racial hatred of white people is a natural outgrowth, part and parcel of an ideology that attempts to indoctrinate us into believing that there is current systemic oppression going on, that all racial disparities we see today is the sole result of oppression by white people, when there are other more plausible explanations to be had that these same people are silencing as impermissible hate speech. They're telling you, shut up. You'll take it, and you'll like it. But contrary to what they're saying, you don't have to take that. You can believe that the things that have been done in the past were morally wrong, as well you should, all the while believing that what is currently going on is also wrong, that we're going backwards, that this is history rhyming with itself. The table is turning in an eye for an eye manner. As the great Mahatma Gandhi once said, an eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind. But those driven by hatred would sooner gouge everyone's eyes out than realize that true victory for people of color would have been having history record that when the power dynamics shifted, we treated white people with a kindness that their forefathers may not have shown our forefathers.
I'm curious too, because I wonder if this applies for like other types of movement too, right? So for example, maybe let's say feminism, or a lot of like these like movements that strive for equality. At the end of the day, does it become more about power after like certain things are, you know, resolved? So for example, right, let's say in America, you know, when it comes to, you know, discrimination based on sex, there's no laws that can do that, right? You know, they outlaw that. There's literally no laws that literally there are literally no laws that prevent women from doing what men can when it comes to the law. So I wonder if like after certain barriers are eliminated, such as like being able to vote, being able to, you know, work a job and not be considered property, after every equality movement achieves like a certain threshold, does it then become about power and revenge? I wonder if we're seeing this currently with like the racial discrepancies. And of course, right, racism and discrimination absolutely exists in America, but it's way, way better than, let's say, the 60s or the 70s, right? Segregation doesn't exist anymore, right? I can essentially do anything that I want to do as an Asian dude in America. And so can Black people, so can Latino people, right? There's absolute real examples of Black billionaires, Latino billionaires, Asian billionaires. So obviously, you know, there is an absolute track record where that's happened, where in the past that was nearly impossible. So I wonder if equality movements eventually get to a point where it just becomes about power and revenge.
But now, it will say when we gained the power, we turned around and started doing some of the same stuff to white people. Segregation, social ostracization, hatred sanctioned by government and law. And we're doing all of this while pretending like we're doing something valiant. We've missed our bus. But that doesn't mean that there can't be a course correction. So, to some people of color watching who are engaging in this sort of hatred, whether or not you're acutely aware, the same people that act like white people as a collective are not people, but rather some pernicious alien force that has come to invade the earth. With this video, I implore you to ask yourself, what are we doing to white people? As some people love to say, do better.
Yeah, I think ultimately we need to ask ourselves, you know, is saying that reverse racism doesn't exist, is that just a lazy excuse to, you know, essentially implement the oppression that past generations of your color have faced? Are we going to become more of an equal society by literally are we going to become more of an equal society by obsessing over race and making everything about race and essentially implementing measures to try and equalize by discriminating people by race? So I think that's a thought that I got from this video, and that, you know, like, again, like I said, I'm no saint too, right? I make white people jokes too, and maybe that's actually the way that we also need to strive for, where we are not obsessing about race and instead being real about each other, right? I've had friends of all different races, and I think the best relationships that I had is when we can make Asian jokes to each other, Black jokes to each other, Latino jokes to each other. So I'm not saying that comedy is the end-all be-all solution, but I think if we can also, you know, not be so obsessed about race where we're tiptoeing around the issue, but actually being able to celebrate and appreciate our differences in a way where it actually brings us together is kind of the key that we need to look for. And the last thing too is that there's no way a white person can make this video. I think the reason why this video blew up is 1.4 million views, and it was because it wasn't a white person. And it's obviously an uncomfortable question that no one wants to really talk about. So, thank you for watching.